Paul S. Burke. She was born on 26 June 1892 in Hillsborough, West Virginia. Her parents, they were Southern Presbyterian missionaries stationed in China, where Pearl S. Burke spent most of her 40 years of her life. She got a Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Howells Medal in 1935 for The Good Earth, which was adapted as a major MGM film in 1937. 1938, she won Nobel Prize in Literature, the first American woman to do so. By the time of her death in 1973, Pearl published over 70 books, novels, collection of stories, biography and autobiography, poetry, drama, children's literature, and translations from the Chinese. The theme of the story, the writer of the story conveys that there comes a time in a man's life when it is required for him to lift from petty considerations of race, nationality, and act in human consideration. Through the story, the writer also shows the impact of war on the life of normal people, and she does so by presenting an American wounded soldier who has to face the fury of the weather and the hostility of the Japanese people. The writer introduced the main character of the story, Dr. Sadao Hoki. Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. It was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. When Dr. Sadao was a child, he would climb up the pine trees. On his visits to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get coconuts from the trees. He would accompany his father to the islands of the South Seas often. His father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. Dr. Sadao would question him childishly that where would they reach from those islands. His father would reply that it was not known as it depends on the future. The future had no limits. It depends on mankind how it shaped its future. Sadao retained all the things that his father would tell him as a child. His father never played or joked with him. They shared a mature relation, and his father underwent a lot of hardships to bring him up. Sadao knew that his father was concerned about his education. He was sent to America at the age of 22 to study surgery and medicine. He returned at the age of 30. Before dying, Sadao's father saw Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. Sadao was on his way to discover a treatment for wounds which would make them absolutely clean. So he was not sent abroad with the armed forces as a doctor. Also, he was retained in Japan because the old general was suffering from an ailment. Ailment means disease, which needed to be operated upon in case of an emergency. The writer describes the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house as the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold. The nights became foggy. Dr. Sadao saw the boundary of a nearby island became invisible gradually as it got covered in the mist. Slowly the mist was coming closer to him. Soon there would be mist all around his house. At that time he would go back into the house to his wife, Hannah, who was waiting for him along with their 2 children. Before Sadao could go inside, the door opened and his wife looked out for him. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress. She lovingly crossed her arm with his, smiled at him, remained silent, and stood by him. They had met in America. Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with her. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met her at an American professor's house. He wondered that had he not met her, he would not have got a wife all his life. He thought that the professor and his wife were kind as they were keen to help foreign students. He was glad that they had accepted this kindness and went to their house because it was there that he had met Hannah. Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence that he went to the professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were small. The food was not good, and the professor's wife was very talkative. If he had not gone there that night, he would not have met Hannah. At that time, Hannah was a new student. Sadao had thought that he would love her if at all it would be possible for him. Sadao and Hannah loved each other even after having two children. After many years of marriage, they had not married in a haste in America. Rather, they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then got married in a traditional Japanese ceremony. They had discussed all the details before the wedding. They were happy with each other. Hannah rested her cheek against Sadao's arm with affection. That moment they saw a figure appear out of the mist. It appeared black in color due to the mist in the air. The outline of a man's body was visible in the mist. He walked unsteadily with his arms above the head. It was an indication that he was a prisoner. The man walked a few steps and then disappeared in the mist. Upon seeing the figure, Hannah reacted by asking that who was that. She took her arm out of Sadao's arm, and both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. They saw him again. He was crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell on his face and kept on lying there. Probably he had fainted. As the area had villages full of fishermen, Sadao said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. He ran to help him. Hannah followed him. The loose sleeves of her haori flew as she ran. This part of the coast was not inhabited, as it had dangerous rocks on it. As the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. As the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. Sadao said that the man was wounded. He approached the man, who lay motionless with his face buried in the sand. An old cap hung on his head. It was soaked with the sea water. His dress was also wet and torn. Sadao turned the man's head. As they saw the face, Hannah spoke confidently that he was a white, that is, an American. The injured man was an American. As his cap fell off, they saw his wet yellow colored hair, which had not been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough, unkempt yellow colored beard. As he had fainted, he did not know of the presence of Sadao and Hannah. Sadao was reminded that the man was wounded, as he had seen blood stains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of a wound in the lower part of his back. It was a gunshot. The man had been injured a few days ago. He had not got any medical help to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black-colored powdery substance on it. The sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it, and so it was bleeding. Hannah was concerned that the man was injured and said in a low voice that he was bleeding. The mist had intensified now. The three of them could not be spotted by anyone. Moreover, the fishermen and the wreck pickers did not visit the place at that time of the day. Sadao answered to himself and said that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. As the bleeding stopped, he stood up and removed the dust from his hand. Hannah supported his opinion but looked intensely at the man as he lay still. Sadao said that if they gave him shelter, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. If they handed him over to the Japanese army as a prisoner, then he would die in the prison. As he thought that both the options were not favorable, so the best option was to put him back into the sea. Hannah added that the kindest act for them was to put him back into the sea. Both of them did not move ahead to do so. Rather, they stared at the motionless figure with dislike. They disliked him because he was an enemy, an American. Hannah was inquisitive as she asked about the man's identity. Sadao replied that he appeared to be an American. He picked up the torn cap and read the words written on it, which were slightly visible. He said that the man was a sailor from an American warship and read out the words US Navy written on the cap. They concluded that the man had been taken into captivity during the war. Sadao and Hannah discussed that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. They were not able to gather the courage to throw him into the sea. Hannah called upon Sadao with firmness. She asked him if he was ready to put him into the sea. Sadao told her that he was able to do so and asked that did Hannah have the courage for it. Hannah replied in the negative and added that if he could not do it by himself, then she had to help him. Sadao was reluctant in throwing the man into the sea. He reasoned that if the man was well, he would hand him over to the police without any hesitation. He added that he was not concerned about the man and considered him to be an enemy as he was an American. He commented that the injured man was a common man as his face looked as if he was a foolish person. He wanted to say that he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was that he was wounded. Hannah said that if he could not throw him into the sea, then the second option was to carry him home. Sadao was concerned that the servants would object as they would shelter an enemy. Hannah said that they would tell them that they intended to hand him over to the police once he recovered. She told him that they must do that. She added that they must consider their children's future and Sadao's position. If they did not hand over a prisoner of war to the police, they would be in danger. Sadao replied that certainly he would do so, and he did not think of doing anything else. Sadao and Hannah lifted the injured man into the house. He was very light. The writer compresses his weight to that of a hen that has not been fed for a long time, and its body loses flesh and reduces into mere feathers and skeleton. The man's arms were hanging, and the dew carried him up the steps into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and they went down the passage towards an empty bedroom. The bedroom belonged to Sadao's father and had not been used after his death. The injured man was laid on the thick mat on the floor. The writer describes the room. Everything in the room was Japanese, as Sadao's father disliked foreign things. Hannah went to the cupboard in the wall and took a soft quilt. She resisted putting it on the injured man. The quilt was made of silk, had a flowery print on it, and the lining were made of pure white silk. She was sad and spoke slowly that the man was very dirty. Sadao said that the man had to be washed. Sadao asked Hannah to get hot water so that he could wash the man. Hannah did not want that Sadao should touch the man. She said that they would ask the servant to wash the injured man. She would call Yumi to leave attending the children for a few minutes and wash him. Sadao thought for a moment and then agreed with Hannah. He asked her to call Yumi while he would call the other servants. Before he could go out, he saw the injured man's face. It was so pale that he stopped, bent forward, and felt his heartbeat to see if he was alive. The heartbeat was very faint, but it was there. Then Sadao placed his hand on the man's heart to feel it. It was also beating. Sadao concluded thus that the injured man was alive. Sadao commented that if the man was not operated upon, he would die. He added that even if he was operated upon and saved, he would die at the hands of the Japanese army. So either way, he would die. Hannah screamed with fear and asked Sadao not to save the man. She feared that if he lived, they would be in danger. Sadao questioned that what would be the implications if the man died. He looked down towards the injured man and wondered that he had a lot of energy which had kept him alive through such torture. He countered his thought with the fact that the man was very young. He seemed to be 25 years of age, and at that age, people do have a lot of energy. Hannah asked him that did he mean the man could die during the operation. Sadao confirmed her question. Hannah was pondering over this possibility, and as she was taking time to reply, Sadao left. He said that something had to be done with the injured man, irrespective of the result. The first thing was to wash him. As he walked out of the room, Hannah followed him. She did not want to remain in the room alone with the white-skinned man. Since she had left America, he was the first white man she had seen. She had no contact with the Americans whom she had met, as they were her enemies. This injured man was also an enemy and was a threat to them. Hannah turned to the children's room and called out to Yumi. As the children heard her voice, she went inside, smiled at them, and played with her 3-month-old son. As she held the baby who had soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth to Yumi, asking her to come. Yumi replied that the baby was ready for sleep and that she must put it to sleep before accompanying her. Hannah held the baby and went to the bedroom next to the nursery with Yumi. Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Hannah led the way as they walked fast towards the kitchen. The two servants in the kitchen were scared after hearing their master's words regarding the injured man. The old gardener, who also worked as a servant, was pondering over the news and pulling the hair from his upper lip. The old gardener spoke bluntly to Hannah. He said that Sadao must not treat the injured white man. He reasoned that the man was destined to die. Firstly, he had been wounded by a gunshot. And secondly, the rocks of the sea wounded him further. If Sadao healed the wounds given by the gun and the sea, then the gun and the sea would treat them as enemies and seek revenge. The gun represents the Japanese army and the sea represents the country of Japan. If they treated the enemy, they would be punished by Japan. Hannah politely said to the gardener that she would pass his message to Sadao. She was frightened, though not superstitious like the old man. She thought that helping an enemy could never be good for them. Still, she asked Yumi to get hot water into the room where the injured man was kept. Hannah went inside first and moved the partitions to one side. Sadao was not there. Yumi followed her and kept the wooden bucket on the floor. As she saw the white man, her thick lips folded and the expressions on her face indicated her determination. She said firmly that she had never washed an American man and that she would never wash one who was as dirty as that injured man. Hannah reacted to Yumi's refusal. She screamed at her that she was supposed to follow her master's order. Yumi resisted strongly. Her dull face had a dangerous look of protest which scared Hannah. She was worried that if the servants reported something different from what had happened, they could land into trouble. Hannah changed her expressions to respect and said, "Very well." She explained to Yumi that they intended to bring the unconscious man into his senses and then they would hand him over as a prisoner. Yumi said that she was not concerned about their plans. She added that she was a poor person and it was none of her business to know about their plans. Hannah said to Yumi that then she should return to her work. Yumi left the room at once. Hannah was again left alone with the white man. She would have been afraid to remain there all alone, but her anger on Yumi's firm determination made her stay in the room. Hannah said with anger that Yumi was a stupid person. She said that it was just an injured man. Hannah was so full of anger that the refusal by the maid Yumi had, without thinking, she opened the blanket in which the man was injured. His chest was bare. Hannah took a small clean towel, dipped it in the steaming hot water, and washed his face. The man's skin was rough due to being exposed to the sun, but it had a good texture and he must have been very fair as a child. Hannah kept on cleaning the man's upper body as she had these thoughts. She did not like the man as he was not a child anymore. She did not have the courage to turn him over and thought of Sadao. Her anger was decreasing and she started becoming restless. She stood up and wiped her hands with the wrong towel. As she did not want the man to freeze due to the cold weather, she put the quilt on him. Hannah called out to Sadao softly. He had been on the door when she called him. He opened the door. Hannah saw that Sadao was carrying his surgery's emergency bag and was wearing his surgeon's coat. He was prepared to operate upon the injured man. Hannah asked Sadao that had he decided to operate the man. Sadao replied that he had decided to operate him. He turned his back to Hannah as he did not want her to object to his decision. Sadao started his work. He opened a sterilized towel on the floor and placed his surgical instruments on it. Sadao asked Hannah to get some towels. Hannah obeyed Sadao and went out to get the towels. She was curious as Sadao was operating upon the injured man. She thought that the blood from his wounds could stain the fine mats which covered the floor of the room. So she got some rough mats from the backyard which were used by the gardener to cover the delicate shrubs from the cold weather. By the time Hannah reached the room, she saw that blood had flowed through the bandage on the man's wound and had stained the mat beneath him. Her effort was futile. On seeing the stained mat, Hannah cried that the mat had been spoiled. Sadao agreed that the mat had been ruined in such a manner which indicated that he was not bothered by it. Sadao ordered Hannah to help him turn the man over. She obeyed him, and then Sadao started washing his back. Hannah told Sadao that Yumi had refused to wash the injured man. Sadao asked her that did she wash him. He did not stop cleaning him. He made fast small movements of his hands as he cleaned him carefully. Sadao was engrossed in work and did not seem to hear Hannah. Hannah wondered that Sadao was not bothered who the injured man was. He was only concerned in performing his work well. Sadao told Hannah that she would have to inject the injured man with a substance that induced insensitivity to pain. Hannah replied that she had never done that earlier. Sadao said in a haste that it was very easy. Sadao was removing the packing and now the blood started flowing faster. He looked at the wound with the help of the bright surgeon's light fixed on his forehead. He announced that the bullet was inside the man's body. He wondered that how deep the wound made by the rock was. He said that if the wound was not very deep, then he could get the bullet out. He added that the bleeding was not from the surface of the skin, which meant that the wound was deep and the man had already lost a lot of blood. When Hannah saw Sadao inspecting the wound, she could not see the sight and so she coughed. Sadao looked at her and saw that her face was yellowish in color, like the color of sulfur. Sadao reacted and ordered Hannah not to faint. He did not stop his work and continued inspecting the wound. Sadao said that if he stopped, the injured man would certainly die. Hannah put both her hands on her mouth, jumped up and ran out of the room. Sadao heard her vomiting in the garden, but he continued with his work. As Sadao needed Hannah's help to operate the man, he thought that it would be better for her to empty her stomach so that she would not feel uneasy time and again. He was reminded that Hannah was seeing an operation for the first time and it was not a pleasant thing to see. Sadao was irritated and impatient as his wife was under stress and he was not able to help her due to the man who lay under his knife. He was just like a dead person. Sadao thought that there was no reason for him to make efforts to save the man because there was no reason for him to live. Sadao became merciless and started working fast. The injured man moaned in his state of unconsciousness, but Sadao kept on working without paying attention to the man's pain. Sadao said to the injured man that he was free to cry in pain. Sadao was not concerned that the man was in pain. He did not want to operate him and did not have any reason for doing so. Hannah entered the room and asked Sadao for the anesthetic which she had to administer to the injured man. Her voice was clear, which shows that now she was prepared to help him. Sadao moved his chin to guide her to the bottle of anesthetic. He added that it was good that she came as the man had started to gain consciousness and it was important to sedate him. Hannah held the bottle and some cotton in her hands. She asked what she was supposed to do. He told her to put some anesthetic on the cotton and to place the cotton near the man's nostril. He did not stop his delicate work and added that she should remove the cotton when the man started to breathe badly. Then Sadao got busy. He felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard. It was just near his kidney. Then with the cleanest and most precise incision, the bullet was out. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious. Sadao gave him an injection and the man's pulse grew stronger. Hannah had to serve the young man herself, for none of the servants would enter the room. The man grew stronger day by day. The servants decided to quit if their master kept the enemy hidden there. On the seventh day, the servants left together. Hannah carried the morning food to the prison. On coming back, she asked Sadao why they could not see clearly what they ought to do. In the afternoon, a messenger came in official uniform. He asked Dr. Sadao to come to the palace at once as the old general was in pain. Hannah breathed a sigh of relief. When Sadao came to say goodbye, she revealed her fear. She had thought that they had come to arrest him. Sadao promised to get rid of that man for her sake. Sadao told the general about the man he had operated upon. The general acknowledged why Sadao was indispensable to him. The general promised to send his private assassins to kill the man and removed his body. He asked Sadao to leave the outer partition of the white man's room to the garden open while he slept. Sadao went home, thinking over the plan. He would tell Hannah nothing. He was surprised to see the young American out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. He complained that the muscle on one side felt stiff. Dr. Sadao said that exercise and massage will be helpful. He then asked Tom, the young American, to go to bed. Sadao slept badly that night. The next morning, Sadao went to the guest room and found him asleep. The second night also passed. The young man was still there. He had shaved himself. There was a faint color in his cheeks. Dr. Sadao told him that he was quite well then. He offered to put his boat on the shore that night. It would have food and extra clothing in it. Tom might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It had not been fortified. Nobody lived there as it was submerged in stone. Since it was not the season of storm, he could live there till he saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. As soon as it was dark, Sadao made preparations to help the young man escape. He gave him his flashlight. He asked him to give him 2 flashes as the sun set in case his food ran out. In case he was still there and all right, he was to signal him only one. He was warned not to signal in darkness, for it would be seen. The prisoner was now dressed in Japanese clothes. A black cloth was wrapped around his blond head. He found the way to the boat. Sadao waited till he saw one flash from the shore. Dr. Sadao had been called in the night to perform an emergency operation on the general. It involved his gallbladder. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. Then he began to breathe deeply again and to demand for food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins. So far as he knew, they had never come. The servants had returned. The room was cleaned. 1 week after the operation, Sadao felt the general was very well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Sadao informed him that the prisoner had escaped. The general asked the doctor whether he had not promised to kill the man for the doctor. He then confessed the truth. He had been suffering a great deal. So he thought of nothing but himself. He had forgotten his promise. That night Sadao waited at dusk for the light from the island. There was none. His prisoner had gone away and was safe. Sadao wondered why he could not kill the young man, though white people were repulsive. So the message of the chapter is that Dr. Sadao upholds the ethics of medical profession in treating an enemy. The chapter is a great lesson of peace, love, sympathy, fellow feeling, and humanism. I know this video got a bit long, but I have explained the entire chapter line by line because this chapter is a bit difficult to understand. I hope you listen to it right from the beginning till end. Thank you for listening. See you next time.